Hello, welcome back to Logical Magic, Examining Esoterica. Okay, guys, today we have another solo episode because my numbers kind of indicate that you really want to hear about spiritual concepts and emotional healing concepts as well as magical ones. And that's best done either just by myself, or Jacob and I have discussions about these things as well. So today's episode is about the role of self-love and self-care in overcoming trauma and in spiritual enlightenment, and how to achieve it, and some examples that can make it challenging. I work so deeply with trauma survivors because I am one. And it isn't about forever defining yourself as someone who bad things happen to. It is just that you have a different emotional response system. It's almost like you're neurodivergent when you have had sustained trauma, particularly people with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a form of stress disorder that is built over the course of a long period of time from which there is no escape. So you see it in war victims, you see it in war veterans, and then you see it in people who had deeply abusive childhoods, in which they had no power and they had to live in a state of fear and insecurity. And there's something called an ACE score that you can go and look up and see where you land on that. My ACE score is technically 9, but there is one form of trauma that I experienced over and over again that they don't include. So I actually would be an ACE 10, which is once you get, somewhere above the number 7 or so, number 6, number 7, it's quite a challenge to be a functional person. And so you can be, but it requires work and self-understanding and self-love. And so that is why self-love, which is something that's thrown around all the time, but we throw around these labels and we don't define them and we don't explain how to achieve them. People make statements about you are lovable just as you are, but they don't tell you how to talk to yourself, particularly if you've never been treated with love and kindness, which most people who grew up in terribly abusive backgrounds, sometimes they will have had one good caretaker or a good grandparent or a good teacher, but not everybody did. I didn't. The only positive relationships that I had were with fiction. I read voraciously. The type of TV that was popular, which I spent a lot of time alone, I spent a lot of time watching TV, was very moralistic at the time and fairly simplistic in the messages that it delivered. It would have been the 80s and the 90s. Those were the things that really helped me form a relationship to self. And then I went to, as I said, Quaker Farm camp as between the ages of 7 and 12. My alcoholic grandmother would save up to send me away, and I have no problem with that. I totally get it. Poor lady was stuck with her very difficult son's child, and she wanted a break, and who could blame her? And it was one of the best things of my childhood, genuinely. And so that was my positive relationships really were about that Quaker Farm camp and books. But that's enough. As long as you have one good relationship to model yourself after, then you stand a good chance. And that's why things like mentoring and the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, the Big Brother or the Big Sister programs can really make a difference in the life of somebody. And please keep that in mind if you're looking for volunteer opportunities. You may not think you know how to mentor somebody, but you start by learning how to mentor yourself, and that is what self-love is. So guys, before I get started, housekeeping at the top of this, because I have to put it somewhere, and apparently you're supposed to put it at the top. If you want to book me for a life coaching session where we kind of go over what are you looking to heal, how do you start healing it, trying to understand yourself, the type of tarot that I do does that. I also do predictive tarot that can tell you what's going to happen when, but I prefer to use tarot with an emphasis on self-empowerment, self-knowledge, healing, so that you can learn how to have the best outcomes that you could ever achieve within this lifetime, and you're not at the whim of fate, which is predictive tarot leans into what's coming towards you, and empowerment tarot leans into what am I trying to make happen and how can I do that? If you wanted to book me for one of those sessions, whichever type of tarot, then you would do so at therisingmoon.com. It is the only way to book me. I will never, ever, ever approach you in any DMs, in any comment sections. I'm never cold calling you, as Jacob would say. Please remember that, and no reputable tarot reader will. So when you get messages like that on different platforms, it is that someone is impersonating that particular spiritual figure teacher, or reader. And then you can find me at Chromecast at the Rising Moon on YouTube. I've got a Patreon coming in January of 2024 that will give you daily energy reads Monday through Friday. Eventually, it will build up to having things like guided meditations to help you heal anxiety and fear, ways to keep yourself grounded, guided meditations to get yourself ready for ritual magic, and I'll also be teaching some magic over the course of time. But it starts with that Spirit Guide Daily, and it is one of the best ways to support the work that I do here, which is trying to make sure that people get as much free access, because this podcast doesn't cost anything. It also does not pay anything. It does not cost anything. And it is to try and help people find the tools that they need to heal their trauma and have their best outcomes, to live their best lives, to have the love that they deserve, and to know that no matter what has happened to you, there's a way to heal it. There is a way to heal it. And it might be difficult and it might be painful sometimes, but once you get through it, it hurts less and less. You become stronger and stronger. That's what we're talking about with self-love, is giving yourself. Please stop thinking of self-love as telling yourself, I'm perfect just as I am, or I'm worthy just as I am. That is a role of it. That is part of it. Although no one is perfect, and we are always trying to improve ourselves, to improve our outcomes, to continue on spiritual enlightening journeys, because that is part of spiritual evolution, is to perfect the parts of yourself that you can to become the purest form of your energy that you can. And that does involve understanding and working with your shadow side, so that you don't have to tell yourself, I'm perfect just as I am, to think that you are worthy of love. To know that every single person has that inner dichotomy, that shadow side, the work that they're trying to do, that maybe they're impatient, maybe they're callous sometimes. Everybody has some kind of monster in their basement that they're like, how do I work with this dragon and make my dragon slay in my battles rather than destroy in my life? That's the role of self-love and self-care. And self-care and self-love are, again, so deeply intertwined. So one of the things, why would you want to do it, by the way? And since it's not just about liking yourself, loving yourself, so that you can learn to only accept the relationships, the friendships, the romantic pairings that are worthy of you, because so many abuse repeats in cycles. And what happens is people who come out of very difficult circumstances will then have relationships with people who, as long as they're not as bad as the people that they came from, you think you're doing well and you have a better life. And quite frequently, it's just a diluted form of the exact same situation, until you heal the damage within and learn to be self-protective and self-loving, self-encouraging, self-reliant. All toxicity has a form of codependency involved in it when it comes to relationships, because toxic relationships could not continue if people didn't linger in them past the point of self-protection. That it becomes a matter of self-respect, which is part of self-love as well, to leave behind the relationships that aren't serving us, that aren't doing that are impeding our progress in this life and impeding our progress in our healing rather than helping it. And that is, again, the role of self-love. So self-love becomes this tagline, this bumper sticker that we get told a lot about, but it's not broken down. It's not explained very frequently. That is one of the things I try to do with absolutely everything that is used as a term in the spiritual community, is to break it down, tell you what it really means, and start examining it, frequently with examples from my own life, as to how to achieve it, so that you can start kind of implementing it in your own life. It's like when you're cooking. If somebody shows you a finished dish, that's the label. That's the self-love. If somebody gives you the recipe, those are the ingredients for how to do it. But if somebody tells you the backstory of the science behind, and then you stir it for 2 minutes so that gluten will develop and the shell will be crispy, then that breaks it down at a level that makes you understand it. And when you understand something at a logical level, it becomes very easy to talk to yourself about your feelings, about why things are happening. You'll find it much, much easier to love yourself when you understand yourself. And that is the role of self-examination and self-love, because you can love the heck out of yourself and recognize the ways in which perhaps you've gotten in your own way, or the decisions that you've made that didn't serve you the most. And you can It's so understandable, by the way. This is the thing that I always want people to understand. If you've had poor relationships, if you've had poor outcomes, if you've had a lot of struggles, it's almost universal. People don't do that to themselves. It's an injury. It is not a character flaw. It's an injury to your foundation and your fundamental emotional well-being and structure that was almost always created by those people around you. So why am I saying almost always? Every now and then there is a genetic anomaly. The saying is that psychopaths are born and sociopaths are made. So sometimes people can quite frequently, just have the wrong, or not quite frequently. Sometimes people will have the wrong wiring. And that also, it's just kind of a genetic thing within them, or it's a mishap of, I don't even know. I don't even know what causes it, but it causes some people to be almost soulless. And I'm sure you talked to someone who is a neurologist and about brain development and what's not connected and what needs to be connected as to why some people truly struggle with having a conscience or having empathy. But those people do exist. Outside of that, outside of clinical diagnoses of very deep personality disorders, most of what people are dealing with is a response to unhealed wounds. And you're almost never the person who truly started out wounding yourself. And if you didn't learn good things, it's really hard to know how to do good things. And so that's part of the reason we're breaking it down. So self-love. Self-love is being able to embrace yourself as a person who is fully worthy of being cared for and worked with and believed in. The easiest way to start with self-love is to start viewing the part of yourself that you're trying to heal as a little kid that you're in charge of. You can view it as a rescue dog, or you can view it as a little kid, but view it as something within you that has a very primal part of you. Your emotional response system, your response to fear, your response to being challenged, your response to any sort of struggle or difficulty within your life is formed at a point in your life when you are very, very helpless. And small children cannot defend themselves at all. And if they're around incredibly reactionary people or punishing caretakers, which sometimes we get both, I did, it can really damage your ability to go with the flow, which is part of a spiritual journey as well, accepting that everything comes to us when it is meant to. But the role of self-love is to look at that part of yourself and not resent it for existing. To understand that that is just a damaged and wounded part of you that you need to care for kindly, but not so kindly that you explain everything away with you're just an injured person, because it's that difficult balance to strike. It's understanding the root of something doesn't mean that you're not accountable. You're still accountable for healing it. If it's been damaging to you and damaging to others, you have a responsibility to self and responsibility to others, if you want to have relationships with others, to heal that part of you so that you don't wound people who are trying to extend you friendship or love or connection. And so the connections and the love and the friendships that you have are healthier and more enduring and more likely to contain all the good parts of relationships, the fun, the affinity, the good times of being with one another and really sparking off another person's intellect, as a for instance. So you have relationships for the right reasons as well when you learn to have the right relationship with yourself. The best way to start is to simply forgive yourself for whatever it is you're struggling with. Are you struggling with having a rotten temper? Are you struggling with, some people, trauma survivors sometimes did not grow up in circumstances where it was safe to tell the truth. And unfortunately, they will learn to lie as a safety mechanism. And that is another understandable part. It's usually seen between about the ages of like 18 and 22 or so, which, please remember, your brain has not even finished developing yet. The last part of your brain to form is your impulse control. It finishes somewhere around the age of 25. So that period where some people go through being very avoidant, it's a part of avoidance. Being very avoidant of consequences, and they will just lie just a lot to get out of things. And it's usually because they did not grow up in a safe circumstance, or they have not They don't have the self-confidence, the self-worth, and the self-esteem to examine what's going on within themselves and still like themselves. Because in order to live, you have to be able to coexist with self. You are the one person that will never leave your side. So you better learn how to get along with that person and understand that person. So let's get talking about what self-love looks like in this world. And first, we're going to start out with, by the way, mild trigger warning on everything here, but it might be triggering. So get ready to hit that 10-second forward button if you're triggered by descriptions of, as a for instance, prior abuse. And I'm only going to talk about physical abuse here. I never talk about the sexual abuse that I underwent, simply because that is deeply triggering for people. You can achieve the same end results in helping people look at what being triggered is without also then traipsing into their trauma. But I am going to describe a couple of things that happened to help people understand what being triggered really is, because that's what you want to start with being triggered. Self-love is key. It is essential to learning the process that you need to start understanding why you're triggered, to recognize when you're triggered, what you're likely to do, the things you can avoid, the self-loving behaviors you need to engage in order to get through that period. And then self-love is also key to achievement and success. It is about being able to encourage yourself when things are discouraging, when you have to keep pushing through. Very few things come to us very easily, even though I believe in magic, I do magic, and there's a lot of evidence in my life that it works. The things that will be retained take time to build and structure into this reality. And so that means the things that you are working for frequently, if you want to retain the success that you have, you'll be asked to heal the things that have damaged your outcomes in the past. And that is part of a spiritual journey. So self-love is part of a spiritual journey in being able to love yourself without believing that you're perfect. Being able to love yourself despite your human flaws. Knowing that it's like, yeah, I'm still pretty awesome. I'm still pretty special, even though I have this part of me that it gets in my way a lot, and I have to figure it out and how not to do that any longer. So being triggered, it has been kind of adopted into the mainstream language, and I don't begrudge people that, but it has come to mean, in a more common sense, the idea of somebody says something upsetting and then you have an emotional response. That's being upset. Being triggered for a trauma survivor involves something called dissociation. And dissociation, if you've never been through it, is insanely physically painful for a lot of people. It always was for me. It's very, very frightening, and you don't have any control over it. And it is when things have become so challenging, your emotional response system is rocketed back in time to an emotional memory that is stored within you, to a time that set that emotional response, usually when you were a child. And dissociation is when you feel like you're not in your body any longer. It can differ from person to person. Every person will have their individual experience, but these are the generalized experiences of people who are dissociating, is not feeling grounded, feeling as if you cannot connect to another person, as if you cannot escape a situation. It's frequently found in sexual abuse survivors who basically leave their body, they become numb, and it's like they retreat into a room in the back of their head and they come out when it's safe. It is genuinely a difficult thing to live with, but it is not a life sentence and it is not a fatal sentence. If you learn to recognize this situation might trigger me, and these are the steps that I need to take. And I talked about that in the triggers episode and how to deal with it. And that's a really good triggers, protocol for how to deal with your triggers. So I'm not going to go over it here exhaustively, just saying that self-love is key to being able to do that in a kind and a compassionate manner. Is recognizing that your self-love comes in every single day, where you can look at yourself and say, it doesn't matter how somebody else assesses my physical appearance or my worth or my contribution to this world. I like who I am in this world, and I am doing my best, and I hold myself to a standard, and I hold myself accountable, and I keep trying. And I would like somebody else if they did that, so I'm going to like me too. Learn to find the things about you that are truly admirable and accept the parts of you that were damaged, because our shadow side is always the part of our personality that was formed in trauma. and learn how to treat that with love rather than resentment. Because dissociation associated with traumatic injury that brings about triggers, which will be upsetting circumstances, parts that make you, again, reach for these very giant responses trying to find safety or to escape something. Often triggers are formed in such traumatic circumstances that people have a difficult time looking backwards and being like, well, what specifically did that to me? And if you can't do that yet, it's okay. And you may never have to, as long as you're willing to accept, I am dealing with a part of myself that was injured so badly as a little kid that I still am. It's almost like you're neurodivergent. Your brain processes your feelings differently. It processes stimulus differently because as a tiny little person, you have no way of defending yourself. You are completely reliant on those around you. And if those around you are hyper violent, hypercritical, explosive, reactionary, you never felt safe. And so your ability to achieve safety is deeply compromised. Think of it as a crack in the foundation of the house that is you. And the way that self-love helps is it fills in that crack with kindness, compassion, self-acceptance. And it doesn't have a thing to do with telling yourself you're perfect. When you have truly accepted yourself, you love yourself regardless. Just as you would another person that you accept their little idiosyncrasies or their, picadillos, there's the things that they do that get underneath your skin because everybody has them. You accept that part of that person and love them for the bulk of who they are. You learn to do that for yourself, and you learn to take care of the part of you that is the everything ruiner when you're dealing with triggers, the thing that has kind of derailed your train too many times. You learn to deal with that kindly and as if you are, it is called reparenting, as if you are taking care of the small person inside of you as the caretaker that you never had. And that's what self-love is. That's what self-love is. Self-love is building the confidence and the feeling of safety within yourself that you are able to achieve what you wish to in this lifetime. And since so many people from abusive backgrounds were criticized and always made to feel as if they were in the wrong, they have a very hard time admitting when they're wrong because it carries with it too much weight. Because usually the abuser made it about your worth as a person rather than a moment in which a mistake was made, which can be corrected by doing something differently going forward. And it's, I'm only chuckling because it's so simple. It's so simple. The solution to these things is so simple, but applying it and believing it at a core level, because nothing is more damaging to a person than being treated as being unlovable by the only people they have to protect them as children. And it leaves a big mark and it leaves a big gap. But the role of self-care and self-love is the thing that fills that gap, that makes it possible for you to become your best partner, your best ally, and your very best friend. And you will never need another person when you truly, and that doesn't mean you won't accept other people into your life, but pay attention to the word need. Need means I can't do it by myself. I need you means I can't do it by myself. You can do everything by yourself, but you can also accept other people. And every now and then we will have situations where we need help. So triggers, losing control, self-love, gaining control compassionately. And you learn how to talk to yourself as if you are talking to a person standing beside you that is going through this. It's okay that you're freaked out. Who wouldn't be? And I'm going to go into the story that if I start laughing about this, it is because it's funny now. It's funny now. It was full-blown horrifying while it was happening. So my dog Oscar is about 85, 90 pounds. And he's the sweetest cuddle bug in the entire world. He was found abandoned on a highway as an adult dog. I've had him for 9 years. I know him really well, and I know he would never, ever harm me. I can cut his nails and things that like veterinarians can't, like professionals can't handle this dog, but I can. And I know any dog can bite, so it's not that. It's that I know his nature very, very well. He wants a leader. He wants to be a follower. My little dog Puddles is actually the dog who is in charge in this household. But there is a thing about Oscar that is, he was likely a farm dog. Nobody knows his backstory because of the highway thing. He was likely a farm dog who was encouraged to hunt for vermin. And that is likely how he was fed for his adult life before he was found on that highway. And I think he might have accidentally killed something, and that's why they abandoned him, because somebody loved him. He wasn't just an abused dog. And that leads me to the Oscar kills things. Like, not people, not children. Everybody's super duper safe around them. Human beings, as far as I know, I'm completely safe around Oscar. But I have seen him kill gophers. I have seen him kill moles. I have seen him kill rats. I have seen him kill bunnies. It's like he went after a pheasant once in front of me, and I just happened to be attached to his leash and managed to pull him up before he got the poor thing. And it's not something I'm in favor of. I don't eat meat. I'm not really fond of my dog eating meat either, but I'm very, very aware that he has a prey instinct, because that's what that is. And then I'm also very aware that even though he is the sweetest dog in the world, that he is the most terrifying thing to see when he is actually trying to defend himself or to defend me, which I've seen him do that once. And he looks like Cujo. He's a really scary looking, he almost looks like a wolf when that happens. He gets really frightening looking. But he is fully capable of defending himself when he needs to. And that is where the two stories about self-love come in, even though they're weird. The first time is that I was swarmed by 3 dogs that escaped from their home, their backyard, while I was walking my dogs about 2 years ago. And it went on for long enough that it began to occur to me as they were swarming around me and the hackles arising on the 3 pit bull mixes that were in this yard. It's I'm in a lot of trouble here, because sooner or later, Oscar is, if they keep growling at him, it's going to be a melee, and I'm right in the middle of it. And just as it was starting to occur to me that it's I'm screwed, these dogs don't even have collars on it, the woman whose dogs they were had run out and had one around the neck, and she kept saying, I'm sorry, and I'm going to die soon. And out of nowhere, a man came running up and was like, hey, get out of here, and chased them away. And it was a bad enough situation, because I took off after that. I was like, let me get my dogs out of here. It was a bad enough situation that the guy jumped in his pickup truck and followed me to make sure I was okay. He came and found me because he's like, are you okay? That had to have been terrifying. And I wasn't frightened right up until that moment at the end. But I am cognizant of Oscar being a potential danger to other dogs. And that means me too, because I don't outweigh him by a great deal. This morning, I was taking my dogs out for their morning walk, and I go down the long driveway that I'm sometimes talking about, where things are beeping and I have to go close doors. I take a right into a neighborhood that is a closed cul-de-sac. So it has a gate at the end of it, and one of the gates you push on, you just walk through, and it's this very nice semi-gated community. It's super safe. It's in the foothills. It's beautiful beyond the telling of it. I get to walk through a movie set basically every single morning. And I do every single morning. There's sometimes I take them on a slightly different walk. This morning I was taking them through there. I open the gate, I come in, and I see 2 dogs bounding down this cul-de-sac, downhill, down the cul-de-sac, not a person in sight. One of them appears to be a pit bull mix. The other is a little dog, like a Pomeranian-sized dog. I believe it was a Papillon, but I'm not entirely sure. And they come running up to us. And the little dog is so cute, rolls over on her back, is showing me her tummy, all love me, love me. And the other dog goes for Oscar. And I mean, gurs, growls, and Oscar's starting to fight back. And I told him no really firmly. And I'm looking for a person, and I don't see one. And it's 8 o'clock or so in the morning, and nobody's out. And I realized I need to get my dogs away now. So I try to turn around and go back through the gate, because there's no collars on these dogs. One has a perimeter fence collar on, so it didn't work, obviously. I try to go back through the gate thinking I'll get my dogs away from them. They'll be safe in there. I can get them back to my apartment. I'll come back and with leashes, and I'll figure out what to do about those dogs, because they're going to die, because on the other side of that fence is a 4-lane fast-moving street of people going about 45, 50 miles an hour. And it's not very far away at all. And it's actually, that's why the gate is there. And there's a small turnout where landscaping trucks can park in front of it, but that's about it. I go through the gate, and to my utter freaking horror, that Papillon dog, the Papillon dog, scoots underneath the gap at the bottom. So now she's on the side where brisk moving traffic is just at my back. And I realize, oh God, I have to go back through the gate towards the aggressive dog to try and help these dogs, or else this poor little dog is going to die. And so that's what I do. And I go back through there, and the dog swarms Oscar again, and he's being pretty good. And I'm looking around going, what in the world am I going to do? A man walks by. They start following him. I'm like, oh, good, maybe that'll lead them towards safety. And he immediately shoos them back towards me as I'm standing there saying, they're not my dogs. He apparently felt no obligation to help and boogied on his way. And I'm standing wondering what I'm going to do, afraid that Oscar, because there's no question who's going to win the dog fight. Oscar would win the dog fight, but like it would not go well. And I just really don't want to be in the middle of a dog fight. As I'm realizing I'm going to need to call for help. And I mean, I don't like to ask for help, much less call for help. I realize I'm going to just have to stand here and start yelling for help, or pounding on people's doors and being like, we got to put them in your backyard till we can find their owners. They're going to die on orchard if we're not careful. Just as that is happening, I hear from behind me in that tiny little turnout for the landscaping truck, oh, thank God. And I turn around, and a red SUV has pulled in there. It's the dog's people come to find them. And all ends well. They take them. They're thanking me profusely. And mostly I'm just like, I really didn't do anything other than make sure your dog didn't get hit on the road behind us. And I had started to make enough noise that people were coming out of their house. So I had to finish walking my dog and explain to 4 different neighbors why I had just been yelling for help, because I didn't realize it, but I had started to yell for help. Hey, somebody help me here. Because I was afraid the dogs were going to die. I have animals. I'm very aware of what they mean to people. So all that goes down, and as I'm walking back, I realize, oh, I feel a little ungrounded here. Something just happened that was really potentially unsafe for me, because I would have to try and pull Oscar off that other dog. And so fear has kicked in, which it never does during an emergency, and most trauma survivors have. We make great EMTs because, my God, during an emergency, we get tunnel vision. We're in survival mode. People can go through years being in survival mode. And I realize I'm going to have to employ like this trigger protocol that I put together immediately when I get home, because that was actually genuinely terrifying, not the least of which that poor little sweet dog was like so close to getting smushed that it was fairly traumatic and upsetting. And I started talking to myself about that. Now, I'm a person who's really, really like, I must be a reincarnated Marine or something, because like at the heart of this all, I'm really tough. I'm really disciplined. I make myself do things even if they frighten me. I just like tell myself, well, you got to go, go, go. Let's do this thing. Let's hit that ground running. And I really am that person in so many different ways. And so I don't have a lot of patience with myself when I'm afraid sometimes. And I had to go back in my head and remember, why are you afraid of situations like that? And the first one I hit on was the first story I told. And then this is where the trigger warning comes in. The first memory that I have is of my father choking my mother and leaning her back over a balcony outside of my room, over a banister, over a stairwell. He was going to drop her. And he was trying to kill her. It had something to do with an oven. I was 5. I don't really know. My grandmother, his mother, the woman who was the alcoholic, came out with a lamp, hit him over the head to get him to stop. And he picked her up by the hair and threw her. And that's my first memory. But there is one before that I recall. Very, very vaguely. It cuts off in the true manner of trauma survivors. If that was triggering for you, this is not going to be any better. Hit the fast forward button a little bit here. My mother and father were incredibly co-combative and very, very violent. And there was something very deeply wrong with my father. Now, my mother would eventually like leave me with him and save herself and my brother. And is that a choice that I respect? No, but I understand it. You know, he was going to kill her. And like this next story is going to illustrate like how I can have compassion for her abandoning me with him. He was always more dangerous to her than he was to me. because my grandmother actually would have protected me. She was not a loving person, but as witnessed by that, she was also not a person who was going to let him get away with a great deal. And she was not normally a violent person. My mother and father were having an argument, and for some reason, in the backyard, for some reason, she thought it was appropriate to throw her coffee cup at him and hit him in the head. And that is my parents to a T. Like, these are very reactionary and violent people. And he grabbed her and threw her to the ground on the driveway and began pounding her head into the driveway over and over again. And I take it what saved, this is the part that that's the last part I remember. According to other people that were there in the neighborhood, what happened next was I began to scream so loud and so long that people came running, that he had to stop, because there was no doubt, and I must have been like 3 or 4, there was absolutely no doubt that like something hideous was happening, because I screamed like a siren. I screamed like the tower, if you're familiar with tarot. I screamed like a lightning bolt. And it did not stop, and it did not stop. And to this moment, I have no idea what happened to me after that point. People came running and made my father stop trying to kill my mom. And please remember, this was at a time when domestic violence was not taken particularly seriously. So calling 911, these were rotary phones for one thing. It was not that time. It was not that time. And so people frequently beat their wives, and there wasn't a lot of pushback against it. O.J. Simpson killing his wife was far in the future at that point. And that was when domestic violence really began to be frowned on. And that is what has always been part of my emotional makeup. And the thing that I started to learn to address in myself with a great deal of self-love is that I literally saved my mother's life by screaming my head off. And that there has always been a part of me that had it ingrained into me that when I am frightened, I need to have a giant response to keep myself safe. When that happened this morning, and it was scary because, like I said, that was a pit bull mix. And I was just so aware that my poor old dogs, and Puddles, who's there, who's helpless. She's just a helpless little dog, and the other little dog. It was actually, I had to give myself permission to recognize, no, that's a big deal. That could have turned really ugly really quickly. People are mauled to death by dogs. I had to give myself permission to be like, why am I freaked out? Because something really freaky happened. And then I had to talk to myself about why I have such a deep fear response that can then lead to me being reactionary or angry. And I had to go back and remember, oh, it's because of those 2 memories that I just talked about. Because in the instance where my grandmother hit my father in the head with the lamp, that was not what stopped him. What stopped him was I started screaming again. And apparently I would never stop screaming. That like the only way to get me to stop screaming like a siren was for everybody to stop doing what they were doing. And I learned to do that. And it is very understandable as a small child that I was doing that because my parents were endangering each other's lives. And inside of me, there is still a person that when I am deeply frightened around physical safety, there is a part of me that wants to push back as hard as I can. And that's where it came from. And I'm not telling, please remember, I had a bad life in some ways, but a great life in others. And I'm always, always aware people had it worse. I do not feel afflicted by my past. I understand that it is a common part of trauma. And the reason that I talk about it is to destigmatize the idea that we're never supposed to, because it might upset another person. If you cannot talk about it, you cannot understand it. And if you cannot talk about it to other people, you may need a professional. They're out there, great. But learn how to talk to yourself about it. There's nothing shameful in having been abused. There is nothing shameful in having been traumatized. There is nothing shameful in having to continue to work with damaged parts of your emotional response system. What I finally learned to do, and I've said this before, and I will say it over and over again until people who need to hear it everywhere, is that we have to have kindness and patience and understanding with ourselves, and that the easiest way to start achieving that is to start looking at it as if it happened to another person, and would you judge them for then having those responses? And I learned to do that with myself because I would never have judged another person harshly for being like, well, of course you're a wreck. It's amazing you're functional, because that was not even close to the only thing that was happening in my life or would happen. Or there's a lot like that. And it's not a contest, and it's not to, I'm fine. That's the point of it, is understanding that you can have things that are so bad in your background that they can seem insurmountable, but if you decide to put on your rock climbing gear and climb them, you can do it. And that's self-love, is telling yourself, I do have these big frickin' obstacles and hurdles to overcome, but if I put in the work, I will get the results. And I'm proud to tell you that I did not end up triggered. I did not end up having any responses that I would not like. I understood I am at risk of being triggered. I'm at risk of being reactionary. These are the steps I need to take, including going and taking a walk, including meditating, including I like to cook. By the way, I'll tell the story someday of how cooking was actually my first form of magic, which is taking what is available to you in your reality and turning it into something else. And that was how I started. I was always experimenting, and it really was one of the things that made me understand what magic really is. And that's why I'm able to do it fairly well, is that you're trying to rearrange your reality into a better shape. And that starts with, if you're a cook from scratch kind of person, you can start with that. It's a creative form. Creativity is part of magic. Embrace some form of creativity. And I cook something because embracing some form of creativity is a good and a healthy form of escapism for me. When you can't focus on some story or some book or some song, then focus on something that you are making or cleaning, and it helps a great deal. That's the role of self-love in overcoming the things that hold you back cannot be overstated. Stop judging yourself and stop berating yourself. The voice that we hear sometimes telling us how much we suck is not our voice. It is what we were told, feedback that we received from people who are either judging us or abusing us. And we never really have the right to judge another person. We all do it sometimes. We all do it sometimes. Almost everyone is coming from their own viewpoint. And we do have a responsibility to ourselves and others to heal the stuff that might make us injurious to other people. We do have a responsibility, both to ourselves and others, to do that. But if it's a struggle for you, look at the magnitude of the injury. Sometimes it's a little bit of a permanent injury. So self-love is accepting that part of you and loving that part of you and saying, it's okay, I'll keep you safe. It's okay, I understand why that's there. It's okay, we'll just take care of this. You can do it. Self-love is talking to yourself in a way about what you can do, not what you can't do. Is about saying, sure, sometimes I have a rotten temper, but sometimes I'm also one of the nicest people anyone has ever met. And I'm working with the temper, and I'm leaning in on the nice part. And that's the most any person can ever do. You do not have to tell yourself you are perfect in order to love yourself. In fact, if you make belief in perfection the only reason that you will love either yourself or another person, then you will always be in a form of denial, for no one is perfect, not you, not me, not anyone. And that's okay. We are human. We are bound through our flaws and through our tools and our attributes and our gifts as well. It is part of being a human being. The human condition is having parts of ourselves. Even the nicest people you've ever met are working with something, trying to overcome an impulse within, because everybody's got a shadow side. So that's where you start with self-love, is not making it contingent on how good you think you are, but rather understanding that usually you're working with really good intent, and that if you have stuff you're working on, that just makes you part of the human race. And to accept that people, including you, are worthy of love, of kindness, compassion, and understanding. And knowing this is why being judgmental is a counterproductive thing. No one has ever been shamed out of anything meaningful. You don't make meaningful change through shame or guilt. You make meaningful change through compassion and understanding. You make meaningful change through acceptance and rebuilding those difficult parts, the parts of you that, like that story I told before. And again, if it upset anybody, I'm truly sorry. I got tired of never talking about some of these things because I found out it is far more common than I realized. So finding that out made it far less isolating. And then I really felt for the people who were so deeply ashamed of something that was never their fault. And so sometimes I will talk about difficult things. And it isn't to upset anybody. It is to help people look at their difficult things without so much fear, because people are taught to fear that through the judgment of others. We do not change meaningfully through shame, judgment, or guilt. We change meaningfully when we embrace self, when we embrace the idea that there is absolutely nothing about me that I can't improve. Absolutely everything about me can be improved if I decide that I will put the work in. And why would you wish to improve? Because you have a happier life, you feel better, you have more things come to you more easily, you have better friendships, you have better experiences, you wake up in a better mood, you go to sleep in a better mood. You have a greater emotional connection to this world and a greater resonance within this world when you heal what you can. But start approaching yourself with compassion. And when you start approaching yourself with compassion, you apply it to other people. Half of what is wrong with the world is we deny compassion to others for their suffering. We like to judge poor people as if, for instance, it's somehow their fault. They must be lazy, or it's a difficult structure that they have never been able to work their way out of, or they were convinced that there was no point, which can also happen to people. Please stop judging you, and you will start being able to accept you. And that's what self-love is. What it ends up doing in the greater, macro view will help you in your walk through life and getting things done and achieving the things that you wish to, because you won't make what other people are doing about you any longer. You'll understand that it's something about them. And that's the other thing that self-love does. When you can look at yourself with kindness and compassion, but authentically, and being able to see the parts of yourself that it's like, that is not my favorite part. The part of me that was very understandably conditioned to have giant reactions to achieve safety came from, those are not the only two times, but they're the easiest ways to illustrate it. That came from something so understandable. And I'm talking about myself. The oldest I was in any of those memories that I've just shared was 5, because my parents split up when I was 6 and I was with my dad. And my half brother was with my mother. And he would eventually die when I was 15, and it was a relief. And that was something I felt a great deal of guilt around, but he was a terrifying person on so many levels, and I had to forgive myself for that too. And that's part of self-love. Self-love is essential. If you will not love you, if you will not embrace the parts of yourself that you're trying to soothe and heal, your outcomes will always suffer a bit because you will be repressing parts of yourself. But your relationships will also suffer because you will be hiding parts of yourself rather than embracing parts of yourself. And that's not about like letting the monster run loose. It's about admitting to people. It's like anybody who knows me, well, at this point, anybody who listens to my podcast is like, yeah, she says that she really has a trigger temper that can blow up a room. I do. Has it come out in years? Nope. Oh, no, wait, it did once, about 6 months ago, but it didn't come out necessarily at a person. It didn't really come out at a person, but I did lose my crap pretty significantly for about a 10-minute period where nobody was harmed. And I kind of examined it as like, oh, I'm triggered. But other than that, no, I haven't aimed it at a person like in a very, very long time. I've been working with it forever, understanding that it was something that literally was engendered within me for physical safety. So maybe stop being so mean to it and thinking it's a part of myself I don't like, but rather saying it's a part that doesn't serve me and I don't want it to be who I am. You can choose who you want to be. You can be the version of yourself you like the most all the time. When you start embracing self-love, not through denial of your faults, but embracing of them as understandable results of the situations that you came through. But that will never excuse what you do going forward. It will simply help you understand what is past and how to do better going forward. So how do you start working with self-love? because it really is key to being integrated with your highest self. Because your highest self, by the way, the part of yourself, your divine self that you're trying to be in alignment with to achieve your life's purpose, is a part of yourself that doesn't overly invest in time, because it is part of your witnessing consciousness, is a part of you that is not overly attached to your suffering, is a part of you that is essentially your soul. And it is attached to the idea that you've come here to learn these lessons, like I talked about in the karma episode, that you've come here to do things, to have experiences, to learn more about yourself and others, and how to perfect your ability to connect and to love, to feel joy, to have this experience be the best thing that you can be. And sometimes that will mean that you are denied many things as you are asked to find joy in simplistic things, because there's so much joy in simple things. Right now, I can look outside and it's a beautiful day. I have a little hummingbird feeder out there, and I watch the hummingbird wars because they will fight to defend their resources, and it's like the cutest little thing you've ever seen. I take a lot of joy in that. That's what life is. That is seeing what is in front of you and finding out what is miraculous in it. And there's always something. Even in the most dire of circumstances, our humanity makes us beautiful. The ability to continue to love despite odds, the ability to continue to connect despite odds, the ability to continue trying, even though this world suffers from so much corruption and hatred and greed. We keep trying, we keep building something. And that's the reason to love yourself. That's the reason to love yourself, is if you're still here, particularly if you got a difficult backstory, if you're still trying, if there's even a part of you that gets up every day and keeps trying and keeps going forward, even if you've become convinced that things can never change, listen to me, they can change. And it starts with the role of telling yourself, I love you even though you've made mistakes. I love you even though you have faults. I love you because I understand where they came from. I love you because you're a very lovable person. You are more than your faults. You are more than your vulnerabilities. You are more than that. The best parts of you, the parts of you that you like the most, are as valid as the parts of yourself that you dislike. And all you have to do to really inhabit a self-loving energy is to encourage the parts of yourself that you do like, and to treat with understanding, kindness, and compassion the parts that you don't, which is not to excuse away the things that they can do that are damaging to you and to others, but to understand that every single time you make a mistake, there is the opportunity to learn from it, to grow, to have greater outcomes, to have greater everything, as long as you're willing to be kindly honest with yourself, to be kindly honest. Sometimes we're all jealous. Sometimes we're all every icky little thing that you can name about, because it's part of being a human, is to treat yourself kindly around that. If you think you're being jealous, ask yourself what you're afraid of. If you're angry, ask yourself what you're afraid of. Self-love starts with recognizing, what are you afraid of? Because you know what the opposite energy of love is. It is not hatred, it is fear. Fear is the opposite energy of love. And so whenever you're trying to live in the greater energy of love, which is self-love, love of yourself, love of others as well, is to look for anything that's going on with what am I afraid of? And this morning, like I said, I did great. Nothing happened from it at all, other than for me to go, I am potentially going to end up triggered, because even though I wanted to dismiss it as not that big a deal, nothing that bad happened, but I didn't know that when I had to, I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know what I was going to do. And whereas the other dog was smaller than Oscar, there was potential to be where's the nearest hospital level of bad for me as well. And I knew that part. It all turned out well, but I didn't know that in the actual moments it was happening, and maybe to be nice to myself, because that would have scared anybody. And the very fact that so many people came out of their houses, I thought of myself as saying hey, I need some help over here. But there were people in their bathrobes. So I don't know, that ability that I had as a little kid to apparently be the air raid siren. I don't know how much it kicked in there. I don't know. All I know is that they were all talking to me and, hey, is everything okay? And oh, thanks for doing that. And I knew there were loose dogs, and It all turned out well for the dogs. It all turned out well for the dogs. It all turned out well for the people. And it all turned out well in the aftermath because I was willing to recognize this is a set of circumstances that can trigger old pain. So if I'm kind to it, if I act like it is, I'm dealing with my best friend who's going through something, rather than being like, don't do that, it's weak, which I can do that. I can do that is for myself, not for others. I don't judge other people as being weak, but for me, like I've always, because I've had to overcome a lot, I have part of the role of it has been like, you're just going to have to be tough. You're just going to have to peel yourself up. You're just going to have to keep going. You're just going to have to keep pushing. And I do that with exercise all the time is just keep going, just keep pushing. Don't push yourself to the point that you break. But the only way to make progress is to keep pushing the limits on what you can do so that you can do more. And instead of looking at it that way, I was like, maybe I should scale back today because that was weird and it was vaguely traumatic. And it called to mind something that had been frightening a couple of years ago. That again, nobody wants to die being mauled by dogs and those 3 pit bulls around me. That was a hairy situation that, again, it didn't really even occur to me until afterwards, like just how bad that really could have been. And then I'm always just terrified of the smallest dog involved is usually Puddles. And she doesn't have any aggression in her. She's the sweetest dog in the world. So my protective instincts also had kicked in. And whenever you know that you need to protect something, fear has been triggered. So remember that when you're reaching for self-love, and it's challenging, ask yourself what you're afraid of, because it's something. And ask yourself where that fear comes from. And start explaining it to yourself as to, of course, that's happening because of this. Of course, that's happening because of that. Those stories that I told, listen, is it a little hard to live with that stuff in my head? Of course it is. But like I said, people have their battles. It's just mine. But it helps me so much to understand that it's like, yeah, if I saw that depicted in a TV program, I'd be like, I bet that little person's going to be kind of screwed up growing up, huh? And I started to look at myself the same way. And as soon as I started doing that, guess what? Everything started getting better. That's what self-love is. It is looking at yourself, not with, how did I screw this up? What did I do wrong? Should I lose 5 pounds? Am I looking old? All of the things, particularly women, I'm not trying to be gendered because honest to goodness, our society has taken biological function and turned it into a personality. And that's weird. That's the gender structuring that we do. And it comes from an honest enough place. For a lot of recorded history, women were far, 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 far more likely to die because of childbirth. Women died in childbirth very, very regularly until about 100 years ago. And so that was why we were considered a weaker sex. We're actually really, 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 really strong and resilient and very tough and able to survive childbirth as well. But that was where the basic inequality came from. Until the advent of more advanced procedures in medicine and antibiotics, women were more likely to die of childbirth than they were of almost anything else. But we don't have to worry about that as much in developed countries. And we can, hopefully continue to choose whether or not we want to have children, which women should be able to choose that. Because if my mother proves anything, some people should not have kids. Honest to goodness. Please keep that in mind when you start talking about, how the role of choice in the world is that there are plenty of people who will be recovering from their bad parents for their whole lives. And that not everybody is actually meant to be a parent. That we will have a better society and a better world if the only people who end up being parents should be. They do it because they want to, not because they owe able-bodied workers like they're the proletariat or something. That's a little bit far afield of these things, but that's another role of loving yourself despite or because of. You are who you're meant to be. You are who you're meant to be. The self-same parents I'm always bagging on for being terrible parents, and they were really terrible parents, both had incredible gifts in other areas and could be the most wonderful people other people would be around. My father was actually a very, very gifted teacher. It's just the rest of his life was a trash fire of dysfunction, toxic behaviors, and violence. But he was brilliant in his own regard. So here's the thing. If we learn how to work with our greatest strengths and increase them, and to work with our vulnerabilities, which is what self-love really is, we get the best world for ourselves and for others. Please think of self-love not just as it doesn't matter whether or not the world approves of my appearance, which is where I started going with that gender thing, is that women in particular are asked to base their self-worth in how others evaluate them. Our world has a tendency to treat a woman's appearance like it's a public commodity rather than a personal possession. Women should do whatever they want to with their personal appearance. It doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to the world. We don't owe pretty to the world. I didn't say that, by the way. I forget who actually did write it about how women don't owe being pretty to the world. It is not a rent that you pay for taking up a space called female. If you like the way you look when you're made up and wearing high heels and dresses and whatever, rock on, have a good time with it. But if a woman wants to walk around in sweats and with her hair up and the slubbies all day, that is no less valid of a way of living life. We're not just decorative, we're full people. And we struggle to be viewed as full people because historically it's taken a long time for them to catch up with, like, hey, we don't die as easily now, and we're just as good at everything else as men are. We really should be treated as being equal. And if men cannot accept women as being equal, they're not looking for partners, they're looking for pets. And it is just kind of part of the way men often view women in a very reductive and dismissive fashion. So a little bit of gender stuff in there because women struggle with self-love in a way that, because we are asked to weigh our worth against what others think of us before what we think of ourselves. Self-love is contained in self-view, and it is not narcissism. It is not narcissism. It is not the same thing as thinking you're better than people or that you're perfect as you are. It is saying that I am lovable and I will love me. I will love me. And if I love me, then it doesn't matter who else does, because I will always have me to treat me properly, to take care of me properly, to protect me when I need to be protected. Self-love is a key to empowerment, and self-love is a key to spiritual evolution. And it is one of the things that, when embraced by women, can help free this world from so many of the things that we struggle with. Because you know what's happening in the world, in this, why we want equality so much, is if everybody's sharing the load in the way that they can, things get better for everyone. There's a reason there's a lot of dysfunction and toxic masculinity. That's a lot to put on guys too. I have compassion for that as well. That as many things that it costs women, it also costs men a great deal, because they're told not to show their emotions, so they have trouble understanding it. Self-love is a struggle for men as well, because they're always being asked to measure themselves by their profession, how much money they make, how much power they wield over others, rather than whether or not they're a decent human being and are contributing to their lives in a way that makes them happier and they have a more meaningful experience. We have so many problems in this world, but we have so many solutions that if we started applying them in a greater, like, blanket effect, things would get better because people would feel better. And that is part of making the world better. Is it's hard to have a decent world that functions well when people struggle every single day with anger and misery and self-loathing. That is what others judging people makes people, it engenders self-loathing. Being judgmental of other people asks them to validate themselves through your lens rather than their own. And sometimes people can get carried away with this stuff, but for the most part, you have happier, healthier people who are in touch with their own gifts and trying to make a difference in this world when they can embrace that self-love. So how do you start it if it's completely foreign to you, if all you ever were criticized and abused? You start by talking to yourself exactly that way. I love you. Look in the mirror, say, I love you. If you want to talk in use statements, that's completely normal too. It is completely normal, by the way. It's the voice you never heard consistently that you have to become. The voice that tells you you can do it. It's okay when you're frustrated. Everybody gets frustrated. Probably have a glass of water and a snack. That helps. Blood sugar issues come into play. Learning how to be your own nurturing influence. That is what self-love is. And you will find it over and over again in people who did not have good relationships with their mothers because they didn't have it. Sometimes through no fault of the person. Sometimes people are struggling with their mental health, sometimes postpartum depression, sometimes they were in abusive situations, sometimes they were desperately poor and had to work all the time. And that led to a gap in somebody's caretaking as well. There are a lot of reasons that have nothing to do with my parental unit sucked, but sometimes people have parental units that should not have been parental units. And it's not always the same thing as saying that they weren't in other ways valuable people. Very, very valuable people cannot be meant to be parents, and they're still valuable. They're still valuable. There is more to this world than breeding and producing more people. And in fact, if we kind of turned our focus towards figuring out what we can do to make this world better, then we would have far fewer issues with everything. With productivity, with the idea of what do you do with an aging population if they don't have children to care for them? Well, you have robust social structures. You engender social conscience in a world so that we feel like we have a responsibility to one another, just as we have a responsibility to ourselves. And all of these things start with self-love. Because when you start treating yourself as being worthy and understanding of the things within you that were formed through your own difficulties and your own traumas, then you start viewing the eye, you turn an eye towards the world that is kinder and more compassionate. And you stop saying, why is that person different from me? And just accepting that they are. And knowing that absolutely every person comes from their own point of pain. The stories that I have shared, it will never be a contest. Absolutely everybody has those formative markers. Mine have a tendency to be these big blasting ones because that's just the life I got. And it helps because it meant I couldn't ignore them. That is why I feel like I'm so fortunate in as many ways as I was challenged, because they were so pronounced. There's like almost nobody who could listen to that story and go, yeah, I'm sure you're fine. Like, you know, like honest to goodness, it's a big thing. And so it left a big mark. And I was able to accept that it would damage anybody else. And so obviously it damaged me. But everybody has those things, the parts where they don't. Sometimes it's simple. Like sometimes I was talking to a client once, she's not going to mind me sharing this, she's a friend as well, that she was trying to recover memories of why she had so many abandonment fears when she had these parents otherwise. And she kept sharing a memory of a playpen. And that what would happen was that there was a point where her mother needed to go take care of her brother every single day. And it was in a house that she was afraid of the living room. And that she would be in that playpen. Now, her mother could hear her cry, but she wouldn't come in because she always cried when her mother left. And this went on like from ages from about 2 to like 4.5. And it had something to do with the little boy getting home from school. And she remembered that, and it was this every single day that he went off to school, there would be this point, and she was afraid of that room. I'm assuming because the house was haunted or something, but she was afraid of the room. And her mother never put that together, that it was the room that was frightening her, and she was afraid to be alone by it. And that happened to her every day. And so she would get anxious when people she loved were out of her sight, and it became a repeated thing in her life as well. Once she figured it out, it stopped happening. That's the role in figuring your stuff out. That's the role in looking at your past to be like, well, what put this inside me? And if you can't find it, it's there. It's there. Accept that it's there for a reason. Every single building block in you was forged somehow. Even if you can't find it, even if you don't have an interest in finding it, it's like, well, something must have made me insecure. Something must have made me frightened. Something must have made me angry. And I'm not going to put off accepting that part of me until I can find the evidence, because you don't need the evidence to know that it's part of you. You can just accept it. Self-love starts from a place of understanding, not that you are perfect, but that you are who you are meant to be and who you were forged to be. And it may present challenges, and it may, in fact, contain lifelong injuries. But that one of the ways I made peace with, like, I'm always going to have CPTSD. I'm always going to have to be working with it. I have so much trauma that, like, I have multiple disorders, and you can't tell because I learned how to function with them, and I don't take any meds. I learned how to cope with them, because where there is disorder, there are the building blocks of order if you know how to rearrange them correctly. And that's what I do. But I also understood beyond a certain point that it's like, I'm going to be living with this my whole life. Well, nobody ever asked for a disorder. Like, people don't want to have type 1 diabetes. People don't want to have heart disease. People don't ask for these things. It just happens. It's part of our human frailty. And it's not a judgment, and it's not an affliction, and it's not an unfair burden. We're not being victimized by our lives. We just are trying to live them in the best form, the best fashion that we possibly can. And learning to love who you are rather than resent the damage that you may be carrying around will lighten the load. It will make you happier because you will like your own company better, which means that your happiness will not be dependent upon who is at your side. You know what that means? You'll let go of relationships, of friendships, of ties that don't serve you, that don't belong in your life, that degrade rather than kind of uplift. It will help you have better boundaries with your family as well. It will mean that, like, if you have to say no to somebody and they attempt to guilt or shame you, you will be able to be like, yeah, I know why they're doing that. It's not going to work because I don't feel guilty about this. I know I have a right to my boundaries. I know I have a right to self-care. I know that the only person that can ever really take care of me is me. And so I better make that one of my priorities, if not always the first thing that I'll do, because sometimes we will choose to sacrifice for others. And that's normal too. And sometimes it will be for loved ones. Sometimes it will be for kids. The role of self-love is saying, I have gifts. There are things that are unique about me that nobody else possesses. Every gift that you have is meant to be applied in some way, but it may come with these counterbalancing energies. All that really big stuff that I talk about comes with really big things in other directions. I have a lot of energy, and I'm a lot stronger physically than a lot of people in my age group, and I'm very, very blessed by that. The very same genetics that brought me the not so great parents brought me robust physical health on a level that you practically have to drop a piano on me to get me to stop. That's a blessing. That's a blessing. There are as many blessings in that terrible backstory as there are traumas. And if I will embrace the blessings, then I will be able to handle the traumas, and that goes for you too. Understand that there's something special about you in your ability to love, in your ability to be kind, in your ability to walk forward. There is something within you that is worthy, that is lovable. Encourage that part, love that part, and be very compassionate towards the things that you are working with. And you will be working with them less and less because you will be healing them. And in healing, there is overcoming, and there is evolution, and there is enlightenment, and there is improvement. And where there is improvement, there is a greater healing that can take place in a world that is suffering. So everything leads back to, we are all one. Heal yourself, and you'll start being able to figure out how you can heal others. And if you're struggling with healing yourself, reach for the resources. Find the people, find the tribes, find the groups, find the literature. And this is a wonderful world in that there is a lot that is free. Everybody does have to make a living. And I'm, like I said, starting a Patreon, doing a couple of other things because I have to do that as well. But that your life will become something that you view as a beautiful journey when you view even your pain as a challenge, a thing you're trying to overcome, a Rubik's Cube that you're trying to solve, that you become the mystery that you are trying to put together into something that you fully understand, fully embrace. And knowing that, like, you'll always have your little foibles. Like I said, I have the big boom bam temper, and I know that I always will. And it doesn't mean that I will ever display it, but I have to be very cognizant of, I will get angry. And it took me a very long time to make that key connection with my greatest anger. My greatest always comes from being deeply, deeply frightened, because I had so many reasons to be afraid for my actual physical life or those around me as I was growing up. And when I really looked at it that way, I was like, yeah, it's understandable. That's understandable. It would make sense to me in another person. I'm going to let it make sense to me in myself as well. And that's the role of self-forgiveness. That's the role of self-forgiveness. When you forgive yourself, you learn how to forgive others. When you learn how to forgive others, you let things go more easily. When you let things go more easily, you're less burdened. When you're less burdened, you can do your work. You can find your resonant and interested path in this world. And it does not have to be about your profession. Please stop confusing purpose with profession. Some artists, their whole purpose here is to create beauty and never make a dime. Purpose and profession are not synonymous. And success is not synonymous with money either. Go on a successful healing journey and your life will be more successful because you'll be happier. And when you're happier, you're more loving towards yourself and you're more loving towards others. So that was the role of self-love, particularly for trauma victims. I hope it helped you somehow. I never work from a script. I never ever do. I frankly, as you probably can tell, don't even have notes in front of me. It goes where it goes. But I always have a reason to talk about these things. And every now and then, someone hands us a key to a door within ourselves. And once you open that door, you find out that so much more is possible because you begin to understand yourself. You start to look in the rooms in your head that you closed off because what was behind them was too difficult. It's not about going back, and it's not psychoanalysis. It's not just going over this bad thing happened to me, that bad thing happened to me, but rather this thing happened to me and I had this emotional response, which was then conditioned into me in how I will respond to the stimulus that comes from an external factor, which is my relationships in this world, my walk through this life. And what I need to do is recondition myself with compassion, with understanding, with positive self-talk, that again, we try to simplify it too much with you're perfect just as you are. You do not need to be perfect. You can't be. Let it go. It won't happen. Just understand that you are so worthy. You are so worthwhile. You are lovable just as you are, and you can heal the stuff about yourself that has gotten in your way before. And that's real self-love. That will last. That will last. Okay. This has been Logical Magic, examining esoterica. Hey, if you want to find me, you can find me at therisingmoon.com for a life coaching session or a tarot card reading. I'm able to use tarot cards to look into your past and tell you what happened and what it made you think and how you feel. And why, I don't know. I just can. I don't know why that part happened. It came as a shock to me when it started happening too. But I'm very grateful to have the ability to try and help people in that area. And I have a YouTube channel called Cronecast at the Rising Moon, where the video versions of this always go up. And then there are some pick-a-cards and some other things on there as well. Please, please, please love yourself. Even if there are things you are deeply ashamed of in your past, almost everything you've ever done was a trauma response. Do some people have bad characters? Sure, of course they do. Some people are born to be happy, some people aren't. We can all be better people. And it's not for the sake of how others will judge us, but how we'll feel within our own lives. It's much easier to like yourself when you like your choices. It's much easier to love yourself when you learn how to authentically like yourself, which isn't about saying I'm perfect. It's about saying I'm worthwhile. Take care. Be well. Thanks so much for joining me.